started mine in open-top vessels, and I left them open until I got down to about probably 1030 or so. I didn't write that down because that seemed insignificant to the scientific test we were trying to do, because I was just doing what I always did every time, and so I was just going about my business making mead like I always do, and I didn't write when I transferred them from an open vessel to putting them under lock and key. But Jim had always taken and put his under lock and key, maybe even from the start. I'd have to check with him now, and it's been a while since we did that. But what we found is the difference was I left mine with an open top, so that it could degas much more naturally and easier than what his did being under a lock and key, meaning being under the airlock. And what we seemed to agree was that by allowing these extra gases more freedom to escape, and for a longer period of time, some of the hot, and you guys will know because you've tasted enough mead, but sometimes people will say it kind of has a heady aroma, or even sometimes a kind of a heady flavor profile. Generally what people are referring to is those higher gases in the gas spectrum of things, and we found that mine didn't have those, meaning that they had already had a chance long ago to dissipate and escape, and Jim's were trapped in the mead, and we found that the meads tasted more grounded and not quite as heady, is the only real way I can, describe that. But it didn't have a bunch of higher alcohol bouquet or perfume to it, and it's sometimes hard to differentiate. Do I smell this or taste it? Because oftentimes what we smell kind of makes you feel like you're tasting it anyway. So smell and taste are overlap so well together. It's kind of hard to differentiating them at some points. But so anyway, that was just a funny thing we learned by accident one day doing a 25-gallon yeast comparison test.
Definitely something you might want to try yourself if you have the chance.
Well, I know, and you see, this is one thing that I've always been an advocate of, and honestly, I think it's might, to some degree at least, separate. Well, I don't want to offend anybody. I think it's easy to want to just make mead, and we all like to do that, don't we? It's fun, and for some of us, we enjoy the scientific aspects of it. Some of you
are geekier about it than others, is probably.
That's right. Yeah. But here's the point that I wanted to say. When AJ said that might be a good test for some of you to do, in my opinion, and it might be hard for some of you, but the more that you will actually do these test comparisons that may seem kind of burdensome and clunky, and they're not so free and easy as just tossing some stuff together and letting it fly and drinking it 6 months later. I think anytime you have an opportunity to do A/B comparisons and to break off a little bit of a batch, to go play with this and that, and you still have your control batch that you can compare to, I feel that the more that you do those kinds of tests, if you will, I think it makes you a better mead maker. I really do. I think that you learn nuances and you have a better idea when later down the road when you're thinking about building a new mead. You have a wider spectrum of understanding to glean from, and I think in the long run it'll make you a much better mazer.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. You wait. I'm roping you in to do a session at the AMMA conference. So.
Oh,
you'll not escape. So.
Well, that's fine. I'll accept that right now. I love that kind of stuff. And
good.
Thank you
Good. Yeah, I'd already planned it. I've had like 3 different people go, Ryan needs to talk at the AMMA conference. I'm like, I'm on it.
Wow, I'm honored, but thank you. Consider it a done deal.
You got a lot. You approach this from a scientific standpoint, and I don't mean like in a in a lab kind of site, but you like to do all the research behind it, and that's valuable, and that's information that can be transmitted, and you do it well. I mean, you really do. I'm a computer geek, so I can be really technical about computers, but when it comes to my mead, I'm not real technical. I flunked chemistry in college, and I got math up to algebra and trigonometry and geometry. Beyond that, we got into calculus, and I was like, I don't even know why I'm here. So, I mean, these are not subjects.
Why would I want to learn this crap? Huh?
Right? Yeah. So it's like I don't go out looking to learn chemistry because chemistry was an extremely painful year of my life.
Right.
But, but I can listen to I listen to you guys. I see what Sergio's done with Mead Made Right, and I was just teasingly on the live feed, I was just typing up, you young whippersnappers, you got batch builders and that. When I was making mead, we had to haul our honey in buckets uphill both ways, barefoot, through bees.
Right.
We had to do math,
in pencil.
In pencil, yeah. We didn't have computers.
Well,
so it's really fun
when I
to see
started
how
just
far
3 years ago. Yeah, Vicki, when I started just 3 years ago, I was using some math equations that Wayne had put together on the website.
Yeah, I remember that.
And the Reddit guy, Baltatherius or something like that.
I've heard about him, yeah. I've never met him online.
Yeah, right. And so that's, even though that was just 3 years ago, that's how far we've come in 3 years.
Yeah.
That's how I started to learn how to do my calculations, and it was all done by hand.
But see, you like math. I saw that stuff and was like, I know I'm supposed to feed at the lag phase and at the one, X intervals until the 1/3 sugar break and stir twice a day. So I didn't have all. I was a seat of the pants mead maker. And so I just went by what I knew to be, regular amounts, and I never punched it in any not even my own calculator, which has been out there for 12 years. I never even really used that because I knew that, to get the mead, knowing the yeast that I like, to get this, I would use X pounds of honey in a 5-gallon batch, and I just it was in my head. And so it's fun seeing the processes emerge now where we can take somebody who's never made mead before and say, buy this equipment, here's a list, take and go here. All right, now let's talk about what do you want to make. All right, you want a fruit mead, then you go here, you do this, and this, and you add these nutrients at these intervals, and if you pay attention to it and give it the right amount of love, at the end of this you will have a bitchin' mead. And it's really, it's all right there, and it's literally like 5 pages, and you know how to make a decent mead if you follow the process.
Well, and I'm happy to say, and I believe this with my whole heart, if you go and start with this podcast at the beginning, and when we're finished, I'm going to say you don't have any reason to not be making good mead right off the bat.
Yeah, if you're asking dumb questions at that point, we're going to wrap you over the knuckles with a ruler like you're in Catholic school, and we're gonna send you to the back of the room to write "I will listen better next time" 1,000 times on the blackboards.
Right. Well, let's get back on track a little bit. So, what batch builder from the Mead Maker website and what Tasna will do is they'll help you to very easily determine how much food you need and when to feed your yeast. And so we've talked about, and we don't, you guys, once you go there, you'll be able to figure that out right away, and it'll just be really, really easy. And it works. It really does work. Now, what I'm about to say, some of you will take, you'll have some different opinions, and I understand that, and I respect different opinions, but I'm just going to tell you my opinion and what I do, and I'll tell you why. But then I'll also say some of the best mead makers I know use different processes than I do, and their meads are absolutely wonderful. So I think one thing we can take away from all this is there are certain things we don't want to do, and then there are several things that we can do a little bit differently. And the example that I like to use is if I go out and get on I-70 and head down the highway, I've got depending on the highway, I've got anywhere from 2 to 6 or 7 lanes wide that the traffic's all going in the same direction. It's all going to get to a certain point, and yet nobody's in the wrong lane when it's 7 lanes wide, right? And so you can't say I'm in lane number 4 and everybody's got to be in lane number 4. You're wrong. But I will tell you this, some of the best meads I've ever drank were made with science that I choose to not employ. So keep that in mind when I'm about to go into where we're going right now. I generally only use and have only used Fermate O since it first came out 2.5 years ago, or at least when I first became aware of it. I think it had come out a little bit more, but wasn't readily available. But as soon as I heard about it, I bought some, and I liked it so well right away that I stopped doing what I had been doing, and even what I had been doing, I was doing different than what was common at the time. I, for one, choose to not use DAP, ever.
Why?
I don't like DAP, but many people use DAP, and they're better mazers than better mead makers. How's that, Vicki?
Thank you.
They're better mead makers than I am. Yeah.
A mazer is a cup. It's DAP, like calling yourself a Stein when you make beer. It's silly.
That's right. Yeah. So I don't like to use DAP, and there's some reasons why, and we'll talk about those. DAP is an inorganic, it's man-made salts that are nitrogen salts. But the example that I like to use is if I feed one batch of yeast Fermate O and I feed the other batch of yeast DAP, I feel like the DAP yeast guys are smoking crack, and they get all hyped up. They go into this super frenzy. They reproduce or replicate, if you will, way faster than they would without the DAP. And I think that DAP can have a tendency to overpopulate your biomass too early in the process. And when those yeast come down off the DAP, it's like feeding your kids an overdose of sugar. And when they come down off that sugar high, they're shot. You can't get those guys to go out and work in the yard or mow the weeds or anything like that. They're done.
So they have a sugar crash, is what you're saying.
I believe so. Yes,
Okay.
and I've read scientific things that say that once they go through that frenzy, they're not really very sound, strong, hardy workers anymore. It's almost like they've been overinflated, they've been hyperinflated, and when they come down off the DAP, they're almost worthless. They're not very good workers anymore. And so imagine a bunch of guys in a crack den smoking crack versus some farm boys next door in the ranch, and they're sitting there eating oatmeal and bacon and eggs and all that.
Barn. That's what we do.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, Jaden just said it's like math for yeasts.
That's right.
Well, what I've read what I've read says that front loading does the same thing. It makes your yeast.
You mean feeding at the
putting all your nutrients in up at the beginning causes pretty much the same thing. They go nuts and then they poop out.
Well, yeah, because by the time they go nuts and they eat it all, it's like you were saying, Ryan, with kids with sugar. They go nuts, they eat it all, and then there's no more, so they crash. And and they're going to crash anyway. But there's nothing more for them to grab onto to keep the high going. So. I can't believe we ended up in a drug conversation, but
well, I think it's a good analogy.
It is. It's very much like that. But yeah, front loading. I mean, I spent the first 10 years that I was making mead front loading because that's what we did then. I mean, the wine staggered nutrient additions from the wine world hadn't really filtered over into the mead world, and I never really ventured into the wine world. I stayed right with mead. So we were still. It was just like you made your starter and you threw it in there, and then you threw in all your nutrients and you stirred the living shit out of it, and then you let it go. And
put it away for a year.
Well, not a year, but you would put it away to ferment for a couple, 3 months, and then sometimes it was good and sometimes not so much. So it was a pitch and wait approach. But yeah, the front loading,
right.
I have to agree with AJ. I haven't read any of the papers on that, but judging by what I've seen, anecdotally, yeah, I'd have to agree with that.
Yeah, and so